My fiancée and her parents mocked my dead mother at the rehearsal dinner. She had loaned them $120K to save them from bankruptcy. I canceled the wedding in front of 100 people, and what I did next left them shattered. I'm 33 years old. I work in financial consulting, and 3 weeks ago I called off my wedding, literally, at the rehearsal dinner, in front of like 100 people. And no, it wasn't because I got cold feet at the last minute or anything like that. It was because my ex-fiancée and her parents decided it was a good idea to mock my dead mother in public, the same woman who basically saved their family from financial ruin years ago. I still can't believe it happened, honestly, but I need to tell this story because it's something that's been eating me alive inside. I met Victoria about 6.5 years ago, maybe 7, at one of those boring work conferences where everyone pretends to be interested but really they're just waiting for the happy hour. She worked in marketing for a mid-sized company, and I had just gotten my current position. She was attractive, intelligent, and at first she seemed to have her head on straight, the type of person who has clear goals and knows what she wants. We started dating and things went well for a long time, or at least that's what I thought. Her parents, William and Judith, were a completely different story from the beginning. But well, you don't marry the in-laws, right? My mistake for thinking that way. William owns an Italian restaurant. It's nothing special, but he does well, and he has that loud, opinionated personality that makes you feel uncomfortable at every family gathering. Judith is more subtle with her poison, like a professional passive-aggressive, always with comments wrapped in fake smiles. From the beginning, they made it clear that they thought Victoria was like beneath her level with me, although they never said it in those exact words. It was more in the way William would make jokes about my job, like, "Oh yeah, numbers, how exciting," or when Judith would ask in a condescending tone about my family, as if they came from another planet or something. Victoria also has an older brother, Kevin, who's just as insufferable as his parents, but in a younger version, and even worse because he thinks he's hot shit. But let me go back a bit further because this is important. My mother, Helen, died 2 years ago from cancer. It was 8 horrible months from diagnosis until she passed, and it was without a doubt the hardest thing I've ever lived through in my entire life. My mom was literally the best person I've ever known, and I don't say that because she's my mother, but because she really was. She was one of those people who were always willing to help anyone who needed it, sometimes even when she shouldn't because people would take advantage of her kindness. My dad always told her she was too generous, but she couldn't help it. That's just who she was. And here comes the part that makes this whole story even more twisted. Like 5 years ago, maybe 6, Victoria's family was going through a terrible financial situation. William's restaurant was about to close because he had made some stupid investments in an expansion that didn't work out. Basically, they had taken out loans they couldn't pay, and the banks were breathing down their necks. Victoria told me all this one night crying, saying that her family was going to lose everything, that her father was desperate and didn't know what to do. I told my mom about it because I needed to vent to someone, and she, being who she was, offered to help without me even asking her to. My mother ended up being a co-signer on a restructuring loan that William needed to save the restaurant. I'm talking about like $80,000, maybe more. I don't remember the exact figure, but it was a huge amount of money. And that wasn't all. Because a few months later, the restaurant's industrial oven broke down, and they needed to replace it urgently, and my mom lent them another $15,000 for that. Oh, and when Kevin wanted to go to an expensive private university but his parents didn't have the money for the full tuition, guess who paid for 2 years of his degree? Yeah, my mother. In total, my mom gave or lent them like $120,000 over 3 years, and they never paid her back a single cent. Every time my dad or I mentioned something about payments, William would change the subject or say that the restaurant was still recovering. And my mom, being who she was, would simply say it didn't matter, that the important thing was that the family was okay. When my mom got sick and died, William and Judith came to the funeral. But it was super awkward because they spent the whole time making weird comments about how many people had come, as if they were surprised that my mother had had so many friends. After the funeral, my dad casually mentioned that he hoped, now that things were better for them, they could start paying back some of what they owed, and William literally said, "Well, Helen's not here anymore, so there's no point in talking about that now, don't you think?" I almost had a heart attack right there. But my dad grabbed my arm and pulled me out before I said something I'd regret. Victoria and I stayed together after my mom's death. She was pretty supportive during the funeral and the first few weeks, although she never said anything to her parents about their horrible behavior. I was too deep in grief to press her about it at that time. About a year after my mom died, Victoria and I decided to get engaged. I proposed to her on a trip we took to the coast. Nothing super elaborate, but it was nice, and she said yes. We started planning the wedding, and that's when things started to get weird, in a way that I didn't want to see at the time, you know. When you're so into something that you ignore the warning signs because you don't want to admit that maybe you're making a mistake. During the wedding planning, I wanted to do some things to honor my mom's memory. Nothing over the top. Like I wanted to have a photo of her on a special little table with a candle, and I wanted the DJ to play her favorite song at some point during the reception. Victoria, every time I mentioned anything about my mom, would get weird, like she'd sigh heavily or quickly change the subject. One day I finally asked her what was wrong, and she said she felt like I was making the wedding too much about my mom and not about us. I was frozen when she said that. I explained to her that my mom had just died a little over a year ago, and that it was important to me that her memory be present somehow. But Victoria insisted that people were going to think it was weird or morbid. I gave in on some things to keep the peace, but I kept the photo and the song because that was non-negotiable for me. A couple of months before the wedding, William and Judith offered to host the rehearsal dinner at a fancy downtown restaurant, not at their own restaurant because, according to them, they wanted something more sophisticated for the occasion. We accepted because, well, it was a generous gesture, and Victoria was happy that her parents wanted to contribute something after my family had paid for most of the wedding. The date arrived, and the guest list for the rehearsal dinner ended up being like 90 people, mostly Victoria's extended family and William's business friends. My side of the family was only like 20 people. My dad, my sister, some aunts and uncles and cousins, and a couple of my best friends. We arrived at the restaurant, and everything seemed fine at first. The place was nice, the food smelled amazing, and people were chatting and having cocktails before sitting down for dinner. We sat at our main table, Victoria and I in the center with our parents on the sides, and everything was going normally until it was time for the speeches. My dad had prepared something short and emotional about how proud he was of me and how my mom would have been happy to see this day. And when he finished, there were some tears at the table. It was a nice and sincere moment. Then it was William's turn. He stood up with his glass of wine in his hand and started with the typical father of the bride speech, talking about how Victoria had grown up so fast and how excited he was to see her get married. But then he started throwing in weird comments. He said something like, "Well, Nicholas isn't exactly what we had imagined for Victoria when she was little, you know. We always thought she'd end up with someone more from the business world. Someone with more entrepreneurial ambition, let's say, but I guess you can't control love." People laughed uncomfortably, and I felt my face turn red, but I told myself that maybe I was overreacting, that it was just William's kind of awkward humor style. But he didn't stop there. He continued saying that Victoria had always been the apple of the family's eye, that she had had suitors from very wealthy families interested in her, and that in the end, she had chosen to follow her heart instead of her head. Like, was he really saying that at my rehearsal dinner? I looked at Victoria, expecting her to say something, to stop him or at least look uncomfortable, but she was just sitting there with a forced smile, doing nothing. My sister, who was sitting at the next table, was looking at me with wide eyes like saying, "Are you hearing this?" And then came the part that made everything explode. William was finishing his speech and suddenly said, "And well, we have to be grateful that at least we don't have to deal with Nicholas's mother meddling in our business anymore. Rest in peace, but that woman was too involved and interfering with our family." Judith, who was sitting next to him, laughed and added, "Yeah, always with her opinions about how we should handle things, as if she knew more than us about our own business." I felt like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on me. The entire restaurant went silent. You know, that awkward silence where you can even hear the sound of silverware touching plates. My dad put down his fork and I looked at me. My sister half stood up from her chair, and I just couldn't process what I had just heard. Were they talking about my mom? About the woman who literally saved their business and paid for their son's college? Were they calling her meddling and talking bad about her in public 2 years after she died? I stood up from the table so fast that my chair almost fell over. I said to William, in the calmest voice I could muster, even though I was boiling inside. Excuse me, William. Can you repeat that? Because I don't think I heard correctly the part where you insulted my mother's memory, who died 2 years ago, and who, by the way, lent you more than $120,000 that you never paid back. The entire restaurant was watching us now. William turned pale, but then recovered and said, "Oh, come on, Nicholas. Don't be so sensitive. I was just joking. Your mother was a good woman, but she had her flaws like everyone." That's when I completely lost my composure. I said, "Flaws? Flaws?" Her only flaw was being too generous with ungrateful people like you. My mother broke her back to help you when you were about to lose everything, and you have the nerve to mock her at my rehearsal dinner in front of my entire family. Judith tried to interrupt me, saying that I was ruining the evening and that I was being dramatic, but I was already in I don't care about anything mode. I said, "Dramatic? I'm the dramatic one here? You just insulted a dead woman who gave you everything without asking for anything in return, and I'm the one being dramatic." I looked at Victoria, who was still sitting there without saying absolutely anything, and asked her directly, "Are you going to say something? Are you going to defend my mother, or at least ask your parents to apologize?" She looked at me with teary eyes and said in a low voice, "Nicholas, please, don't make a scene. We can talk about this later." And that's when I knew, with total clarity, that I couldn't marry this person. I couldn't spend the rest of my life with someone who wasn't going to defend what was most important to me when I needed it most. I told my dad and my sister that we were leaving, and the three of us walked out of the restaurant. Outside in the parking lot, my sister hugged me and told me I did the right thing, that they were shameless bastards. My dad was quiet, but I could see he was furious. He had that face he makes when he's trying to keep his composure. We stood there for like 10 minutes, breathing fresh air and trying to calm down. I was shaking with anger, and something else I couldn't identify at that moment. Maybe it was pain or disappointment, or a mix of everything. Then my sister said to me, "You know you can't marry her after this, right?" And I knew. Of course I knew. But hearing it out loud made it more real. My dad put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Son, your mother wouldn't have wanted you to marry someone who doesn't respect you or her. It has to be your decision. But you have our support, no matter what." In that moment, I decided I had to go back inside, not to apologize or to fix things, but to end this once and for all in the right way, or, well, as right as it could be given the circumstances. I went back into the restaurant and everyone went quiet again. Victoria got up from the table and came towards me, saying, "Nicholas, thank God you came back. I thought you had left forever. Can we please forget all this and continue with the dinner?" I told her no, that we couldn't forget it, that this was too big to just ignore. I walked to where the microphone they had used for the speeches was. I grabbed it, even though the event organizer tried to stop me, and I said loudly so everyone could hear, "I want everyone to know that the wedding that was planned for this weekend is officially canceled. I'm not going to marry someone who allows their family to insult and belittle my mother's memory, especially when that same mother was the reason their family still has a functioning business." The place exploded in murmurs and exclamations. Victoria was crying, saying I couldn't do this to her, that I was being irrational and that I was going to regret it. William yelled something about me being ungrateful and that they had paid for that dinner, to which I responded, "And my mother paid for the last 5 years of your lives, so I'd say we're even." I put down the microphone, looked at Victoria one last time and told her, "I'm sorry, but I can't do this. My mom was the most important thing in my life, and I'm never going to be with someone who doesn't understand that." And I left, this time, not to return. The next day, my phone exploded with messages. Victoria sent me like 200 messages that night, and all the next morning, alternating between apologies, pleas for me to reconsider, and eventually anger, saying that I had ruined her life and that I had humiliated her family in front of everyone. Her parents also sent me messages. William telling me I was a spoiled child who didn't know how to forgive a joke, and Judith with her typical passive-aggressive messages about how I had broken her daughter's heart. Kevin, the brother, sent me a long message telling me I was an idiot and that Victoria deserved someone better, which was ironic considering my mom had paid for his college education and he had never thanked us even once. About 3 days later, Victoria showed up at my apartment. My dad and my sister were with me, helping me deal with all the mess of canceling an entire wedding. You know, returning gifts, notifying guests, canceling the venue, and all that. When I opened the door and saw her standing there with her eyes swollen from crying, for a second I felt something like pity. But then, I remembered how she had stayed silent while her parents destroyed my mom's memory, and that feeling disappeared. She told me we needed to talk, that she couldn't let us end like this after almost 7 years together. I let her in, but told my dad and sister to stay, because I didn't trust having that conversation alone. Victoria started with a speech about how she knew her parents had crossed the line, that she also thought what they said was horrible, but that I had overreacted by canceling the entire wedding instead of just talking to her first. I asked her directly why she didn't say anything in the moment, why she didn't defend my mom when her parents were insulting her, and she didn't have a real answer. She said something about being in shock and not knowing what to say, that everything happened very fast. I told her that was exactly the problem, that after almost 7 years together, she should have instinctively known she had to defend my mom, that she shouldn't have needed time to think about it. My sister intervened and told Victoria that she was a coward, that she had chosen the comfort of not confronting her parents over doing the right thing, and that I deserved someone who was going to be on my side no matter what. Victoria started, crying harder, and said she loved her family, but she also loved me, and that it wasn't fair for me to put her in that position of having to choose. That's when I exploded again. I told her I wasn't asking her to choose between her family and me under normal circumstances, that I was asking her to defend what was basically decent and right, which was not allowing anyone to speak ill of a dead person who had helped them enormously. I reminded her of everything my mom had done for her family, every loan, every generous gesture, and asked her how she could stay silent when they were calling her meddling. Victoria had no arguments. She just kept repeating that she was so sorry and that she would do anything to fix this. I told her there was nothing to fix, that this had shown me who she really was when things got tough, and that I couldn't trust spending my life with someone like that. My dad finally spoke and told Victoria it was time for her to leave, that my decision was clear and that insisting was only making things worse. Victoria left crying and yelling that this wasn't over, that she was going to find a way to get me to give her another chance, but I was already mentally out of that relationship. A week later, I discovered something that made the whole situation even worse than it already was. I had a box with memories of my mom in my closet, things I had saved after she passed, like photos, some of her jewelry, letters she had written me when I was a kid, that kind of stuff. One day, I was looking for something in the closet and noticed the box was in a different position from where I had left it. I opened it to check and realized my mom's necklace was missing, a necklace that my dad had given her on their anniversary and that she practically never took off. It was a simple but beautiful piece, with a heart-shaped pendant that had her initials engraved on it. I immediately knew Victoria had taken it, existed, and where it was kept. I sent her a message demanding she return my mom's necklace, and at first she denied knowing what I was talking about. I told her not to waste my time, that I knew she had taken it and that I wanted her to return it immediately. After several back-and-forth messages, she finally admitted she had it, but said she had only borrowed it because she wanted to feel close to me during all this drama, that she knew how much it meant to me, and thought that if she wore it, maybe I would remember the good times we had spent together. I told her that wasn't borrowing, that was stealing, and that I needed her to return it that same day or I was going to involve the police. She told me she didn't have it with her, that she had left it at her parents' house to keep it safe. And that made me really angry because it meant I would have to go to William and Judith's house to get it back, which was literally the last thing I wanted to do at that moment. But that necklace was too important to just leave it there. I went to their house accompanied by my sister because I didn't want to be alone in case they got dramatic. When we arrived, William opened the door and looked surprised to see us there. I told him directly that I was there for my mom's necklace, that Victoria had taken without permission, and that I wasn't leaving without it. William tried to say he didn't know what necklace I was talking about, but my sister interrupted him and told him to drop the act, that Victoria had already admitted to having it, and that all he had to do was give it to us so we could leave. Judith appeared behind William with the necklace in her hand and literally threw it at me, as if it were trash. She said something about how I was being dramatic about all the fuss I was making over a simple piece of jewelry, and I responded that it was much more than a simple piece of jewelry, that it was one of the few physical memories I had left of my mom, and that her daughter had no right to take it. William then brought out his true self and started yelling at me about how I had ruined Victoria's life, how the whole town was talking about us because of the wedding scandal, and how I had made them look ridiculous in front of their business friends. My sister went at them verbally before I could respond. She told them that they had caused all of this with their disgusting behavior, that they had insulted the memory of a woman who had saved them from bankruptcy, and that they should be thanking my mom every day instead of speaking badly about her. She also reminded them that they had never paid back a single cent of all the money my mom had lent them, and that they had the nerve to act like they were the victims in this whole situation. The argument got more and more heated until finally my sister and I decided it wasn't worth staying there. We already had the necklace, which was the only thing that mattered. We left, and as we walked to the car, I could hear Judith yelling from the door about how ungrateful we were and other things. I honestly don't even remember, because I was too focused on making sure the necklace was okay. That was 3 weeks ago. I blocked Victoria and her entire family from everywhere: phone, social media, email, everything. My dad helped me finish canceling all the pending wedding details, and fortunately, we were able to recover some of the money from the deposits, although obviously we lost quite a bit. Some of the mutual friends that Victoria and I had have tried to contact me to tell me that maybe I was too harsh, that I should have handled things differently, but honestly, I don't care what they think. Those who really know me and knew my mom know exactly why I did what I did. My sister told me something a few days ago that's been spinning in my head. She said, my mom would have been proud that I stood up for myself and defended her, even when that meant ending a relationship of so many years. I think she's right. My mom always taught me not to let people disrespect me or walk all over me. And even though she was super generous and kind, she also had very clear limits when it came to dignity and respect. I'm not gonna lie, there are moments when I wonder if maybe I overreacted, if I should have given Victoria another chance to fix things with her parents and me. But then I remember how she stayed silent while they destroyed my mom's memory. And I know I made the right decision. I can't build a life with someone who isn't going to be on my side in the moments that really matter. Someone who is going to prioritize keeping the peace with their family over doing the right thing. My mom's necklace is now in a safety deposit box at the bank, along with other important things. I don't want to risk anything happening to it. Sometimes I take it out just to look at it and remember my mom. Remember how incredible she was and everything she did, not just for me, but for so many other people, including a family that ended up being completely ungrateful to her. The other night, my dad and I were having dinner at his house, and he brought up the subject. He asked me how I really felt about everything that had happened, and I told him the truth, that I felt liberated in a way. Obviously, it hurts because it was almost 7 years of my life with Victoria, but I also realized that I had been ignoring warning signs for a long time, not just about her relationship with her parents, but about how she handled conflicts in general. She always avoided confrontations, always wanted me to be the one to give in to keep the peace, and I did it because I thought that was being a good boyfriend. But now I see there's a difference between compromising in a relationship and losing your dignity and values just to avoid conflicts. My dad told me something that made me feel better. He said that a person's true character shows in difficult moments, not in easy moments when everything is fine. Victoria showed her true character that night at the restaurant, and her parents showed theirs by mocking my mom after everything she did for them. And I showed mine by not letting that happen without consequences, even when that meant canceling my wedding and starting over after almost 7 years with someone. I don't know what's going to happen now, honestly. I'm 33 years old, and I just got out of a long relationship that I thought was going to end in marriage. But what I do know is that I don't regret my decision. My mom deserves to be remembered with respect and love, not with mockery and insults from people who owe her everything. And I deserve to be with someone who understands that and who is willing to defend what's important to me, just as I would be willing to do the same for her. I guess that's what I'm looking for now. Although I'm not in a hurry to start anything new yet. For now, I'm okay being alone, healing from all this mess, and honoring my mom's memory in the best way I know how. Living with the dignity and values she taught me.